got to go see Better Man. This is the brand new sort of musical biopic coming from Michael Gracie, the same guy who directed the Elton John movie. He also directed The Greatest Showman. There's a lot of these big musical type of movies. This is, of course, the movie about Robbie Williams, which there's a little bit of a twist. It's not simply a biopic about Robbie Williams. It's a biopic, but they made Robbie Williams a monkey for some reason. Because Hollywood was sitting there saying, how can we make these musical biopics a little bit different? How can we spice them up? Well, they came to two options. They said, option number one, you cast Timothée Chalamet. Option number two, you make the guy a goddamn monkey. Because it's different. And I had a pretty good time with this one, although I do have some minor problems with it. Robbie Williams is an interesting figure. Interesting in the fact that I had no idea who he was. And most people, apparently, from America have no idea who the hell Robbie Williams is. But this guy seems to be pretty damn popular in England. It seems the UK seems to love him. He's a very famous, popular pop star there. Here in America, I had no idea who this guy was. I know a couple of his songs, but I just didn't know him. And so that's an interesting thing, going into a big musical biopic and not knowing the guy, in contrast to like the Bob Dylan biopic, where of course Bob Dylan's like an American icon. I know everything about him. So this movie had kind of a double job, at least for me personally, to actually introduce me to this dude while also being a solid movie in its own right. So I kind of went into this almost like I would go into a fictional movie about a figure that I am unfamiliar with, which I think actually worked better for the plot of this film. I don't know how this movie works for somebody who is a big Robbie Williams fan, but me not knowing this guy and just seeing him as a dude who's a monkey, actually helped the experience of getting invested in this character. I also found it interesting that Robbie Williams himself played himself in this movie. That's different. I think every movie should star a monkey if it's a musical biopic, so the actual actor can play themselves, unless they're dead, which happens. But can you imagine if Bob Dylan was a monkey and Bob Dylan was playing Bob Dylan, how weird that movie would have been? Could have been amazing. This movie as a musical biopic is definitely very different than any other musical biopic that you're going to see out there. The only thing that it is similar to is Rocketman, which is of course from the same director, where it treats the movie essentially like a musical. Most of these musical biopics about stars are musicals, essentially, right? There are a bunch of dramatical scenes, and in between them you have scenes of them singing. But a lot of the times they do the singing practically. It's them on stage, it's them performing, introducing a new song. This movie, along with Rocketman, takes these musical sequences and actually treats them as musical sequences, things that don't work in the actual canon of the story, meaning characters will just sometimes break out in the middle of the street into these gigantic musical performances. And for me personally, I love that style in these films. I loved it in Rocketman, and it works great here, the film actually being a musical, mixing in Robbie Williams' real music and just having these big ginormous sequences that are so much better than any of the musical sequences in Joker Filet-A-Poo-Poo. Had to throw that punch in there. Yes, you're catching a stray, Todd Phillips. I will say the CGI on the monkey also looks great. It's essentially the same sort of look that they used in the Planet of the Apes movie. It's not perfect all of the time. I mean, you have a whole movie, 2 hours and 15 minutes, of having to have this monkey thing here, and it looks good like 90% of the time. It works out well. The performances, the personalities, the emotions coming through Robbie Williams as the monkey, it all works. I also think all the other performances around Robbie Williams are also really strong. They do a good job of getting sort of that depth to all these other characters, specifically the person that played Banana, the grandma, whatever she was called. That character, my heart, man, it's broken. And the guy that played the father, I really love the father relationship story in this movie. It's very complex, and it feels very personal. This whole movie feels very personal. Now, obviously, Robbie Williams playing himself was heavily involved in the making of this movie. I don't know how involved he was with actually scripting and formatting it, but clearly, this is an extraordinarily personal movie. It almost feels like an autobiographical film. And to that extent, you feel that sort of personal aspect here. You feel like this is a person kind of going through their journal and laying out these aspects of their life and their relationships, their regrets, their issues, how they pick themselves up, and it just feels so much more, like I feel more connected to the actual subject matter in this film than I do in a lot of other musical biopics, where sometimes they're made without that person's actual involvement, like, at all. Like Bohemian Rhapsody, where Freddie Mercury is dead. This feels so much more personal, and because of that, it adds so much more emotion to the actual movie itself. I already talked about the musical sequences, but I want to just mention again, they are beautifully done. The music is really good, and the dancing and the set pieces and the choreography is all magnificent. It's brilliant. It's as good as you would expect from any musical in the modern age. My one little issue with this film is I just think it's a little too long. I say this in a lot of movies these days, because a lot of movies are long. This movie's about 2 hours, 15 minutes long. It probably could have been about an hour and 45 minutes. I think you could would cut some fat over different aspects of this film. It just got to a point where it felt a little drawn out, and some of the things in that third act that were supposed to hit harder emotionally didn't hit as hard because the movie had kind of lost me slightly. I just think it drags a little longer than it needed to. But yet again, a movie about an artist I had never even heard of, where they make the artist into a monkey just as a gimmicky concept thing. And yeah, it's a ridiculous movie that works so much more than it probably should have. This is a movie that I think a lot of people were going to write off. A lot of people probably already have written off, but I'm happy to say it's a really solid musical biopic in a time where we're getting a lot of very generic ones, or very generic ones that are still very good. Of course, I loved A Complete Unknown, even though it is a very standard, formulaic version of that genre. This is not a formulaic, generic version of that genre. This is that genre trying to be elevated and doing something a little bit different and cinematic, which I appreciated. This is a solid movie. I recommend you go check it out, whether you are a fan of Robbie Williams or whether you have no idea who this guy is. Go in, give it a chance. I think you'll have a good time with this movie. I will give Better Man a 4 out of 5. I had a really good time. I had a lot of fun with this. Thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.